Kansas Territory, July 1872. Dust clung to her lashes and the back of her throat as the heat pressed down like punishment. The square outside the post station in Dodge City was loud with flies, sweat, and the sharp voices of men bidding over souls. Delaney Zeller tried to keep her chin high, but her wrists were bound and her pride was bruised raw. She stood barefoot on the crude auction block, her faded dress clinging to her ribs, her hair falling in sun-bleached tangles. She had not cried when they tore her from the wagon outside Abilene. She had not cried when they'd shot the man who tried to protect her. But now with the sun above her and a dozen ranchers eyeing her like livestock, Delaney's throat gave out. "Please," she whispered. "Mercy." The crowd did not pause. "Healthy, strong back, good with animals," the seller barked. "She's young, 18 and a half, no husband, no family." Delaney shut her eyes. That part was true. Her mother had died crossing the Missouri, her father gone 2 winters back in a mining collapse. She had been heading west to start over. She had not expected this. "Start the bidding at 50, 65, someone called. 70, a chuckle. "She ain't worth 70. The seller jabbed a thumb toward her. "You want a girl who can work, this is one. 75, Delaney's stomach twisted, her hands trembled behind her. She could feel the air shift with each number, like a noose tightening. 80, 85, she tried not to cry. She tried to hold on to what little she had left of herself. Then, a new voice rose from the shadow at the edge of the crowd, not a voice exactly. Just the sound of a boot hitting the dirt, slow and steady, and a single hand lifting into the air, no words. Just that hand. The auctioneer blinked. 100, mister, is that what you're saying? The man was tall, dust-covered, with a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his eyes. He stood with the ease of someone used to silence, but his presence made the space around him still. He nodded once. The other bidders fell quiet. "Sold," the man barked, still uncertain. "To the cowboy in the back, 100. Delaney's knees nearly gave. A man approached her, cut the rope at her wrists. She stumbled down the steps, blinking under the sun, her arms aching from the binds. The man who had raised his hand waited by a black gelding. His shirt was worn but clean, his boots scuffed, his face unreadable. He had not said a word. "You bought me," she said, voice catching. Why? He met her eyes. His were pale gray like river rock. "Name's Prescott Danner. I did not buy you. I freed you." She stared at him. "You paid $100. He looked away, adjusting the saddlebag on his horse. "Still do not make you property." The words hit her harder than she expected. "I do not have anywhere to go," she said. "You do now," Prescott said. "Come on," she hesitated. "Where? My place is north of here. You can rest, eat. No one will touch you." She studied him, how he stood with his weight evenly balanced, how he never looked long at her face, how he kept a quiet distance. He looked like he had spent more time with horses than people, but there was something steady in him, something safe. "I do not want to be charity," she said. "You are not." She bit her lip. "I do not know what to say." Prescott finally met her eyes. "You already said it. Mercy." He helped her onto the gelding behind him, careful not to touch more than he needed. She held the saddle horn, not him, as they rode out of Dodge. The sun was behind them now, their shadows stretching long across the prairie. They rode for hours before the land grew green again, scattered with cottonwoods and the faint murmur of a creek. His cabin sat tucked into the bend of 2 low hills, smoke curling lazy from the chimney. Delaney slid off the horse, her legs trembling. Prescott opened the door and gestured her in. It was not big, a single room with a bed, a fireplace, and a table, but it was clean, quiet, safe. He handed her a tin cup of water. "There are clothes in that chest. Belonged to my sister." Delaney took the cup, fingers brushing his. "You live alone," he nodded. "Since she passed," she swallowed. "I am sorry." He looked down, jaw tight. "Me too." She turned to the chest, knelt, and opened it. Simple dresses, worn but soft. She pulled one out and clutched it to her chest. "I will wash and change," she said. "Take your time," Prescott said, stepping outside. She cleaned herself at the basin, changed, and brushed out her hair with a small wooden comb she found at the bottom of the chest. When she stepped outside again, the sun was low, painting the sky gold. Prescott was chopping wood with clean, practiced swings. She watched him for a moment. "You did not have to do what you did today." He paused, resting the axe. No, but I could not stand there and do nothing. She nodded slowly, walking to the fence rail. I thought I was going to die up there, I know. His voice was quiet like the creek behind the house. She turned toward him. Why do you not talk much? He looked over. Words are cheap, actions are not. She smiled a little. That is fair. That night, he let her take the bed. He rolled out a blanket by the fire. Delaney lay staring at the low ceiling above her. The scent of cedar smoke and wild sage filled the room. She had not felt safe in weeks, maybe longer. But tonight, in this quiet cabin, she let her eyes close. She woke before light, and he had already started the fire again. Coffee brewed in a tin pot, and a skillet hissed with something that smelled like cornbread. You cook? She asked, surprised. He shrugged. Enough to keep from starving, she smiled. It smells good. He handed her a plate. Eat all of it, you need it. She sat, eating in silence. After a while, she looked up. What now? He met her gaze. That is up to you, she blinked. You are not going to send me away. No, why? He set his cup down. Because I want you to stay, her breath caught. I do not expect anything, he said quickly. But I would like you to stay if you want to. She stared at him. I do. Something passed between them, then something quiet and strong, not love yet, not fully, but the beginning of something unshakable. He nodded once and stood. Come on. I will show you the horses. And she followed him out into the morning light, her heart beating faster than it had in months. The barn leaned slightly east, but the walls held. Its red paint had long since faded under Kansas wind and sun, but inside the air was cool, thick with the scent of hay and horsehide. Prescott led her through the wide door, stepping aside so she could see the 3 horses inside. A tall sorrel gelding flicked his ears toward her. The 2 mares beside him shifted in their stalls, quiet and curious. She's expecting, Prescott said, nodding toward the smaller of the mares, a dapple gray with soft eyes. Delaney stepped close, resting her fingers on the stall rail. How far along? Few months, maybe. Hard to say exactly. She moved slow, letting the mare sniff her hand before touching the velvet muzzle. She's calm, always has been. Brought her down from near Garden City. Took 2 days just to get her in the wagon. Delaney looked at him. You handle animals better than people, he took his time answering. Don't have to guess what they're thinking. The horses shifted behind them, chewing contentedly. Sunlight spilled through slats in the barn wall, striping the hay-strewn floor in gold. You said your sister lived here, Delaney said, brushing straw from her skirt. Her name was Clara. She came with me when I left Tennessee, thought we'd start fresh. She liked to paint. Used to spend hours sketching the creek. Delaney glanced at him, careful. What happened? Fever took her last spring. She didn't speak for a long moment. You kept her clothes. That means something. Prescott leaned against a beam, arms folded. Couldn't bring myself to burn them. Figured someone might need them one day. Delaney nodded, not knowing what to say that wouldn't feel too big or too small. Instead, she walked toward the back of the barn where a ladder led up to a loft. Mind if I look? Go ahead. She climbed carefully. The boards creaked but held. At the top, the loft opened into a low-ceilinged space filled with bales and swallows' nests tucked into the corners. A few old sketches were pinned to the far wall charcoal outlines of trees, the creek, the hills beyond. She was good, Delaney called down. She had an eye for stillness. Delaney sat for a moment, letting her legs dangle over the edge. My mother used to hang herbs from the rafters back in Ohio. Mint, thyme, yarrow, the whole kitchen smelled like summer. Prescott looked up at her. You miss it. I miss who I was there. Not the place, he gave a small nod. I get that. Later, as the sun climbed higher, they set about hauling water from the creek. The ground was dry, the heat pressing hard by midday. Delaney rolled her sleeves and worked beside him, her hands blistering from the rope handle of the pail, but she didn't complain. You don't talk much, she said, wiping sweat from her brow. Don't see the point unless there's something worth saying. She looked straight at him. And was freeing me worth saying something? He didn't meet her eyes. Didn't think silence meant I didn't care. She studied him, then turned back to the water. I never thought a quiet man could be kind. Prescott took the bucket from her, setting it down gently. Kindness isn't loud. They worked until the light softened and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of wild grass and dust. She cooked that evening, using dried beans and a heel of salt pork she found in the larder. The meal was simple but warm. "You ever cooked on an open hearth before?" he asked. "I learned after my father passed, we had to make do." He watched her stir the pot, then turned his gaze to the window. "You'll have what you need here, I can't promise more than that." Delaney set down the spoon. "I'm not asking for more," he nodded, but his jaw worked slightly, like he was chewing something he hadn't tasted yet. She turned back to the fire. That night, she moved the blanket from the bed and laid it out beside where he slept, near the hearth. He stirred when she settled beside him, but didn't speak. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said into the quiet. He didn't answer, but his hand reached out slowly, resting near hers, not touching, just close. She didn't move away. The fire crackled. The wind whispered just beyond the walls. She closed her eyes. "Tomorrow I want to help with the fence, if that's all right." His voice was low. "It's all right." Outside, the land stretched wide and dark, but inside there was warmth, not just from the fire. From something steady and slow, building between two people who had lost more than they'd ever say, but who, for the first time in too long, had someone to sit beside when the night came. The fence line stretched a quarter-mile west of the barn, where the land sloped gently toward a patch of wild rye and buffalo grass. The posts had weathered and leaned, some half-rotted at the base. Delaney walked alongside Prescott, a coil of wire slung over one shoulder, her boots cutting soft tracks in the morning dew. He carried the post driver and a quiet focus that hadn't faded since dawn. She matched his pace, dust rising in the soft hush of their steps. "Why'd you never leave this place?" she asked, balancing a new cedar post against her hip. Prescott kept his gaze on the fence line. "Left once, didn't suit me." "Where to?" "Colorado Territory. Thought I'd try mining work." Lasted 4 months. She planted the post into the hole he'd dug earlier. Too loud, too lost. Delaney watched him drive the post with measured strikes. "You ever think of starting over somewhere else?" He paused, lifting his hat to wipe his brow. "Land's the only thing that's never lied to me." She crouched to gather the fallen wire. "Honestly, that's the best answer I've heard in a long time." By midday, they'd set 6 new posts. She tied the wire while he checked the spacing. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them had changed. It felt shared now, not separate. They sat under a cottonwood to eat cornmeal biscuits and dried apples he'd packed earlier. She leaned against the trunk, chewing slowly. "Did you ever think you'd marry?" she asked, eyes on the distant hills. He folded a piece of biscuit in half. "I used to. Before Clara got sick, I'd started looking for a place closer to town. Thought maybe I'd build a house with a porch. What stopped you? Didn't want to bring anyone into something I couldn't keep." Delaney pulled her knees to her chest. "You've kept this place standing." He glanced at her, then back to the fence. "Only just..." She let the quiet settle before speaking again. "I thought I'd marry someone like my father, steady, good with tools, always whistling." "Did he whistle when he worked?" "All the time, even in a storm." Prescott gave a small huff through his nose. Not quite a laugh, more like something remembering how to be one. "You whistle?" she asked. "No, not since I was a boy." "Maybe you should again." He didn't answer, but his eyes lingered on her a little longer before he stood. That evening, Delaney stayed out past sunset, watching the mare in the paddock. The horse paced slow circles, belly swelling with the shape of new life. Prescott leaned on the gate beside her, arms folded. "She's restless tonight," Delaney said. "Might be close." Delaney leaned her arms on the top rail. "You ever delivered a foal?" "Twice," she nodded. "I've never seen it. It's quiet work, hard but worth it." Moonlight slid over the hills, casting the land in muted silver. The night was warm, crickets humming through the grass. "Are you angry?" she asked suddenly. Prescott shifted. "About what? What they did to me?" He was quiet for a long breath. "I'm not angry, I'm ashamed." She turned toward him. "Why ashamed?" "Because I saw it coming and still didn't move fast enough. You did more than anyone else." "That doesn't make it enough." Delaney's voice was soft. "You were the only one who didn't look away." He looked at her, the shape of her face clear in the moonlight, and something in him eased. "I won't again." She stepped closer, the tips of her fingers brushing his arm. "I believe you." Prescott didn't move, but he didn't pull away. The air between them carried the scent of dust and sage, and something older, something waiting. Inside the cabin, the hearth had gone cold. but she didn't relight it. Instead, she sat at the table, tracing the edge of a tin cup with her thumb while Prescott stowed his tools. When he reached for the lantern, she stopped him. "Leave it," she said. "I like the dark tonight." He left it unlit. Sat across from her, Delaney's voice was steady. "I want to stay. You said that before. I mean past the fence work, past the foal. I want to make something real here." Prescott leaned forward, forearms on the table. "You sure? I'm tired of running, and you make the quiet feel safe." His jaw shifted, slow. "You make the quiet feel less lonely." She reached across the table. He took her hand, not a word more passed. There was no need. The rough of his palm against hers was promise enough, and outside the wind moved through the grass like breath, steady and alive. The foal came just after midnight, beneath a sky veiled in soft clouds and stars half hidden. Prescott had been watching the mare since dusk, lantern trimmed low, his breath visible in the cooler night air. Delaney hadn't gone back inside. She leaned on the stable door with her sleeves rolled, a bucket of warm water at her feet, linen strips clean and folded beside it. Neither spoke during the birth. The mare strained, her body trembling with the effort. Prescott murmured low, not to the horse, but to the silence itself, and when the foal's slick body finally slid into the straw, Delaney let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "She's breathing," Delaney said, crouching beside the little thing, her voice hushed with awe. She laughed gently. "She's perfect." Prescott nodded, kneeling to check the legs, the cord, the shallow rise and fall of the chest. "Strong filly," he said. "She'll stand before dawn." Delaney sat back on her heels, the straw sticking to her damp skirt. "I never thought I'd see something like this." He looked at her, the lines of his face softened in the lantern glow. "You brought her in calm." "She trusted you. I was just here. Sometimes that's everything." She met his eyes, and the quiet between them felt fuller than words. She dipped a cloth into the bucket, wiped her hands, then stood and brushed the hay from her skirt. "I'll sit with her a little longer," she said. "You go rest." He hesitated, then passed her the lantern. "Wake me if she struggles." Delaney nodded and watched him disappear into the dark, boots crunching the gravel path back toward the cabin, the foal stirred, legs twitching. Delaney settled herself on an overturned crate, arms folded against the chill. The night was thick with the smell of straw, blood, and new breath. She stayed until the stars shifted and the foal stood on wobbly legs beside her mother. By the time she returned to the cabin, dawn was warming the windows. Prescott was already at the stove, pouring coffee into the tin pot. She stepped inside, brushing loose hair behind her ear. "She stood," she said, her voice hoarse with sleep. "Strong legs." Took her time, but she was steady. Prescott poured 2 cups, handed one to her. "That's good." Delaney took a sip, then leaned against the table. "I want to name her," he nodded. "She's yours to name. I'll think on it." They drank in silence for a while, then Delaney looked around the cabin, eyes scanning the hand-carved shelves, the wash basin, the worn boots by the door. "I was thinking," she said, tracing her finger along the rim of her cup. "We could build a second room." Prescott raised an eyebrow. "What for? For me to start. But maybe for what comes after." He set his cup down. "You mean to stay long enough for building?" She nodded slowly. "I do." He studied her, then reached for another log and fed it to the stove, the fire catching with a soft flare. "We'd need more lumber. I've got a friend near Buckland who mills pine. I can help with the cost," she said. "You don't need to." "I want to." Prescott looked at her, then not a glance, but a full gaze, quiet and sure. "All right." They spent the next 5 days measuring, marking, drawing lines in the dirt. Delaney kept the ledger, penciling notes with careful fingers. She'd never built anything before, but she asked questions, watched how his hands moved, how he sighted the level of a beam against the sky one evening. As they sat on the porch step, she turned toward him. "What made you come west in the first place?" He leaned back against the doorframe, arms resting on his knees. "My father fought in the war, came home with lungs full of smoke and a temper he couldn't put down. I left to keep from turning into him." She nodded. "You didn't." His voice was low. "Not yet." Delaney shifted closer. "You're not like him." He looked at her, eyes steady. "You don't know what I carry. I don't need to. I know what you do with it." He turned his gaze toward the pasture, the mare and her foal silhouetted against the fading light. "You're not afraid of what's been broken." "I've been pieces before," she said. "Doesn't scare me anymore." Prescott reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. No hesitation, no rush. Just the quiet truth of closeness earned. The days turned warmer. The filly followed her mother through the grass, ears flicking at every breeze. Delaney began planting near the south wall beans, squash, a row of corn. She worked barefoot in the early hours, her hem muddy, her hands sun-browned and strong. Prescott built the new room frame by frame, and each night she helped drive the nails. They didn't talk about the past, not anymore. It lived behind them, quiet and unmoving. What stretched ahead was something else entirely: hard work, yes, but chosen. One night after supper, Delaney stood at the new doorway, the moonlight spilling across the unfinished floor. "When this is done," she said, "it'll be ours." Prescott came up behind her, his palms settling at the small of her back. "It already is." And for the first time, she leaned into him fully, her head resting beneath his jaw, his arms circling her without question. No words passed then. None were needed. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, the cabin held firm against it, and the land around them breathed steady. By mid-August, the sun rose later, and the light took on a deeper gold, casting longer shadows across the prairie. The new room stood finished, walls sealed, floor planed smooth, a single window looking east toward the creek bend. Delaney had sewn a muslin curtain for it, pale blue, stitched with steady hands in the quiet hours before dawn. Prescott had built the door frame wide enough for two to stand side by side, though he never said anything about that. He didn't have to. On a Thursday morning, rain came soft and steady, soaking the ground and turning the spaces between rows in the garden to a thin soup of mud. Delaney stood under the covered porch, watching the filly gallop through the downpour, tail high, fearless. Prescott leaned against the beam beside her, arms crossed, the scent of damp earth rising around them. "She's wild," she said. "She's free," he answered. Delaney turned toward him. "You ever think about having children?" Prescott didn't flinch. He rubbed the knuckle of one thumb with his other hand, then nodded once. "I have." She waited. "I didn't think I'd get the chance." Delaney stepped closer, her voice even. "Would you want to raise a family here? Not just build a house, but a life?" Prescott looked at her, really looked. "With you, yes." She rested a hand on his chest, firm and steady. "Then ask me." He didn't hesitate. "Will you marry me, Delaney?" Her answer was quiet but sure. "Yes." They married 3 weeks later, beneath the cottonwood near the creek, the leaves turning pale as the season shifted. No preacher came. Prescott had carved a ring from the edge of a walnut branch Clara had once used for drawing. Delaney wore her mother's lace collar stitched to the neckline of her dress. It was just them, and the land, and the sound of water moving over stone. Afterward, he lifted her hand to his lips and held it there, not as ceremony, but as truth. By late September, the mornings turned cool enough for frost to cling to the window panes. Delaney woke early, wrapped in wool, and began grinding cornmeal by hand. Prescott brought in firewood before the sun cleared the ridge. Their days took on rhythm, mending tack, tending the mare and filly, trading eggs for flour with a neighboring homestead 6 miles north. One afternoon, Delaney sat cross-legged in the grass, the filly nosing at her boot. Prescott watched from the fence line, a slow smile touching his face. "She follows you like a second shadow," he said. "She knows I'm hers." He walked over, crouched beside Delaney, and drew a small folded paper from his vest pocket. "I sent a letter to the miller in Buckland. Ordered planks for a cradle." Delaney blinked. "You did?" He nodded. "I know it's early, but I want it ready." She pressed a hand to her stomach. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." They said nothing else. He rested his hand beside hers, not touching, just near. The filly lay down in the grass beside them, legs folded, breath slow. That winter came hard and early, with snow by mid-November, but the cabin held warm. Prescott insulated the walls with extra clay and burlap, and Delaney lined the windows with thick quilts. They slept tucked close, her back to his chest, his hand on the curve of her growing belly. The baby came in early April, when the first green shoots pushed through the thawed soil. Labor lasted through the night, long and quiet, with only the crackling fire and Prescott's steady voice guiding her through. At dawn, a girl was born, her lungs strong, her hair dark as tilled earth. They named her Clara. Prescott held her in both hands, his face still, eyes full. "She's whole," he whispered, as if the word itself was a prayer. Delaney, pale and damp with sweat, leaned against the pillows. "She's ours." They planted a cherry tree near the barn that spring, its blossoms marking the turn of their first full year. The filly, now grown, stayed close to the house, protective and calm. Prescott built a second cradle that summer, just in case. Delaney laughed when he showed it to her, but she didn't tell him to stop. At night, they sat with Clara between them, the lantern low, the sounds of the prairie folding around the cabin like a blanket. Sometimes, Delaney would hum an old tune her mother once sang, and Prescott would tap his fingers against her knee in rhythm, his other arm wrapped around her waist. Their love never flared, but deepened, quiet, constant, like water carving stone. They never left the homestead. There was no need. They had built a life from the broken pieces of what once was. And in every board, every row of corn, every morning they woke in each other's arms, that life endured. The land kept its promises, and so did they.